What up, guys? That Comic Awesome here, doing another review. Today doing Punisher the Platoon number 6, and this wraps up the Punisher Platoon series, and it was good. And if you have not been reading this, shame on you. This definitely, you kind of get a different look at Frank. And this story's not really... It's not really about Frank, and that's what the ending is. You know, it's about Frank, but it's more about the storytelling around Frank, and really how that goes. But it's the imagery. There we go. Imagery. The imagery is superb. You definitely get a sense that Garth Ennis put his heart into this. So last issue, the Platoon had been sent in to recover some fallen American soldiers' bodies that were pretty much left in a swamp during a battle. I think over the winter or the wet months or over there. And so they had to go in, get the bodies back so they could be sent back home for proper burial. While there, they were ambushed. They tried to radio for help. Their radio batteries were dead. They were able to get one call out for an airstrike. And so they started to retreat back into the swamp and pretty much just said, like, hey, hit the tree line. Also about the story in general. Unbeknownst to Frank, he had kind of come across a little bit of a nemesis in Li Kwang, I believe her name is. She essentially, a couple of her squad mates were taken out by Frank as he called in an airstrike in the first issue, and she kind of made it her personal goal to kill Frank, even though her colonel urged her to kind of stay out of combat, and he didn't urge her to stay out of the combat because she was a woman, and that's a very important distinction. And this is where, like, a lot of muddled, feminist issues might come in. They'll say, like, oh, well, he didn't want her on the front line because she was a woman. No, if you read into the story, he didn't want her on the front lines because she was such a great soldier. He wanted her back behind to be able to teach and lend her experience to soldiers as they're getting trained to make better soldiers. Well, she directly disobeyed that order, essentially, or not order, that suggestion that he gave her, and then spotted Frank and was able to set up this ambush. And that's pretty much where this picks up. So a nice thing about this too is the military talk that they have in here. It feels very authentic. Again, a lot of it doesn't make any sense to me because I was never in the military, but it was reading it. I go, yeah, I could see that's how that's supposed to go down. So you have some Air Force chatter, kind of back and forth between command and stuff like that. Hilltop, this is Galileo, 1-5, 4 Fox 4s. It's like, I imagine, like, this is like Top Gun, and they're, like, about to do some business. So they're coming in for the airstrike that was called. But while that's going on, so while the airstrike is happening, Frank kind of had the drop on him by Li Kwang. Meanwhile, pretty much everyone else in the platoon is out. The sergeant was shot pretty bad. The comms officer, I can't remember his name, has his legs broken, or a leg broken. Everyone else is kind of in it bad. And this was the one thing, when I first read this part, I'm not going to lie, I'm going to turn the page, and I was disappointed. I was disappointed at first. But then I thought about it, and I'll explain why. So Lee Kwang is stabbing Frank in the back, repeatedly. Like, you see the knife. She stabbed the knife in the first panel. He's trying to get it out. She takes it out, and she's stabbing him over and over. And I can only imagine, 1, 2, 3. So that been stabbed 5 times in the right shoulder. So then Frank jumps and pretty much plows her back into a rock and breaking it. And they say, what happened next, only the Sarge saw. So he's laying there pretty much like guts in his hand, and he's watching this whole thing go down. And so, and then it says, she was bleeding bad, she was done. Mortars coming in all around, but all you can see, she knows he was there. So it's like, then she turned, and for a moment there was a look between them. And he's like, a look. And this is what I love. The author of this book that he's interviewing the members of the platoon, he kind of gives it like a little bit of like a movie, spin. He's like, oh, was like a look like her respect for an enemy, or he's going to give her a clean death. And he says, you know what it was? Nobody's damn business but their own. And so, and then she's dead. So they kind of built up this nemesis for Frank, and now 2-3 pages into the final issue, she's dead. And I was like, oh man, that was like a little anticlimactic. But then the more I thought about it, I mean, in those 3 pages, what you can unpack from that is so much. One, I mean, what happens in war, in real war, doesn't happen like in the movies. There's not, when you have an enemy, he's gonna like toy with you like a cat. If he takes a chance, he's gonna take a chance and go after you. And the next was this, like the whole, like they had a look between each other, and the sergeant is like, well, what was that? What was that look? Was it like, kind of like what you see in a movie, like when you've been bested and like your enemy comes and he's like, I'm gonna give you an honorable death or whatever. He's like, no, that look was between them. And I mean, you could imagine it was a million different ways. For me, I'd like to think of it as, she knows she was done, almost like a deer who's been hit by a car, like, just put me out of my misery. And Frank is probably, that was probably the look she was giving him. And he was thinking, well, I'm going to kill you anyway. You're the enemy. I don't think it went any deeper than that. Because again, to him, he had pretty much no knowledge of the existence of Lee Kwang until this moment. So she, the kind of nemesis feel was all one-sided. To him, this is just some Vietnamese enemy, and that is it. There's nothing more and nothing less. So then, the Vietnamese colonel who is returning to his camp to find that, again, pretty much his army had been deployed without his say-so, and Lee Kwang is still missing in action. Meanwhile, and again, this really goes to show like Frank being Frank. So he gets, he's like, tries to get the medic going. There's gunfire, hysteria everywhere. There's the comm officer. Again, his leg is like bent in a completely wrong way. And he's like, I called in the airstrike. And then, the general, I guess, under the colonel, he's like, we have them, heaven is just, heaven is watching, God will grant us victory today, brother colonel. And he's like, not today. And then he's like, today, God is American. Amen. And he's like, and he rides on iron horses with wings of fire. And then the airstrike just... You know what? If that was the airstrike, I'm sorry. This was the mortar fire. This was not the airstrike fire. That was the mortar fire from the Vietnamese. So then the airstrike comes, and Frank does what a good lieutenant should do and protect his men, and he just dives onto the sergeant to protect him. And he's like, later on I wanted to thank him, and he's like, we need good NCOs. And I pretty much call them cowards, this and that. One of the planes has a malfunction and ends up landing right on, This to me was a little convenient and a little cartoony, but then it lands right on top of the kind of arrogant sergeant. I want to skip some stuff because I want to get to this really good part. So they're kind of sitting there and reminiscing about how Frank got them out alive, and that was the most amazing thing. But how they got them home, he got them home, but that wasn't the end for a lot of people. Some members re-upped and got killed in action. But this is what was weird. So the first book made it seem like it was the interview was happening between the only surviving members of Frank's platoon, but they make it seem here that there's more, and they're actually in contact with each other, as war buddies tend to. But then, so they're trying to, the author is painting Frank in obviously a way. He's like, do you think that contributed to what he became? And they're like, Frank Castle saved our lives of every man in that platoon through the nightmare. He's like, you understand how important that is. You see how much more important that is than a first kill, than the Punisher, all the other answers to the mysteries people always want to know. So he's like, it doesn't matter if you're trying to find an origin or whatever. He's like, it doesn't matter. The only point of this story is that man got us through a time when we were dead, and he took us and got us out. And then there was this really cool part where he's like, towards the end of the interview with Gape, he was interviewed the colonel of the Vietnamese army. He pretty much is like, he gives this analogy how, the Vietnamese were fighting for their home and their country, while the Americans were fighting for nothing with no idea what they were doing, which was what a lot of people thought of the war. And he's like, but then he corrected himself. He said, no, that isn't fair. The best of them were fighting for each other. And he's like, so it was like, you're fighting for your team. Even though you might not know what you're fighting for, you're fighting for the man next to you. And he says, but love isn't enough to win wars. Then there's this really good imagery from the comms officer where he says the last time he saw Frank, he was being airlifted out. He's like, I waved. I knew he wouldn't wave back. He said, all the same, I watched him for as long as I could, this little figure not moving once. And then the hue dipped and we were gone. And that was the last time I ever saw him. But then if you turn the page, it's him waving. To me, I feel that even shows that the imagery that his platoon was painting of him may have been skewed in a little more of a hard light, that maybe he wasn't even exactly that way. Almost like a fabled tale. Like this might be like a fabled tale of them telling Frank's journey, because he did wave. But yeah, that's what I think. This is amazing. Pick it up if you can find the first 5 issues, or pick it up on trade paper. But yeah, subscribe over here, watch some more videos. Hit me up in the comments, let me know what you guys think, and I will see you next time.